Good afternoon, everybody. I kept thinking to myself that we have the best dressed panel of the day, but then I realized Scott Soshnick was up here, so that's not saying much. But I had to get one in on Scott. It's great to be here. I'm very excited about this panel, Athletes as Investors. We have an incredible group of individuals who all come at this conversation from different perspectives. And so we're going to dive right in because the clock is already ticking. And I want to start with Paul in the middle of the stage. Recently we saw the PLL out there with Kevin Durant. And so you think Kevin Durant is one of the stars of the NBA getting involved with, what you're doing with the PLL. Why does that investment make sense? Why does that partnership make sense? And let's start there.
Yeah, well, Kevin and Rich have done a great job at Boardroom and 35 Ventures, and they have a really strong portfolio of properties that they have partnered with. And we had several conversations about the future of professional lacrosse, and both of them felt that it fit right into their investment thesis. But what I really love about Kevin is that he wanted to stretch his investment purposefully. And for us, that meant building a property alongside him that could increase participation, that could bring popular relevance, that could expose the game to communities that otherwise don't have access to it. So it was an investment and an immediately breakout session of let's build this street lacrosse initiative that we had been conjuring. So that's been fantastic. What I'll pull back and say, at least for us as a league that took on an investment from an athlete, I've made a number of investments on behalf of our investment advisory arm called Rabil Ventures. And then I'm sitting next to probably one of the greatest athlete investors and athlete operators that I actually spent a lot of time sort of modeling my post-career off of in Grant, is that you look at the reason why athletes are so attractive is that they give you access, obviously more than ever now, liquid, so access to capital. They give you a direct access to an audience that is highly engaged with them, which especially if you're a consumer brand, that is really critical. They give you access to network and potential leads to other capital, and then again, relevance. So whether it's Grant or operators famously like Roger Staubach or Vinnie Johnson that sold his real estate company, and then Vinnie built Piston Group. I mean, it is just, there's Ronnie Lott. There's a history of it that stretches beyond the modern era of social. And our version, or the version that we're creating, is, it's complex and interesting and unique, and has allowed us to, I think, continue to grow.
I love what when you looked at Grant and kind of used his career off the court as something that you were looking to, and saw Tamika across the stage smile. What does that mentorship look like when you obviously see it across sports, but within the brotherhood of the NBA players? What does that mean, and how is that valuable to really changing the narrative, changing some of the trajectory of the types of investments that athletes are getting involved with?
Yeah, so really great question, and thank you for having me. So absolutely, I think Grant, Magic, Michael, they've all sort of set the stage around what our players could do, right? So in describing what they're getting exposed to now, they are exceptional athletes, but now they're getting more exposure to the business world. So some of the things that we've done is give them exposure to business titans, right? So that they are actually sitting at the dinner table with Robert Smith, with Magic, with Grant, where they're talking about investment, because a lot of this is really things that are being brought to them. And when they're looking to invest, they're coming to them and saying, where should I go? Where should I be spending my money? What do I have a passion in, and how can I drive that from that standpoint? So I think it's a game change for us, but quite frankly, it's something that our players have always been really excited about. They've always been the business titans, particularly when you look at our executive committee. Earlier, George was talking about Carmelo. He sat on our EC. You think about KD and the things that he's doing. It is because they're also getting exposure within the union as well.
Grant, what does that mean to you to hear someone like Paul talk about, the track record that you've set and your time coming up through the league and what you're doing now?
Yeah, no, first of all, those are very kind words. And, it's interesting because I feel like I'm still trying to figure it out myself. And I'm 10 years removed from playing. But no, definitely. I mean, obviously, I'm aware of what Paul has done, and really impressed as I'm learning more about his investment thesis. I do think back, though, for me, I had a father who played in the NFL, and all that I heard were sort of the horror stories of athletes during the 70s and early 80s who did not make the kind of money that athletes make now, but also fell on hard times financially. So I looked for examples of athletes who had success. And despite my athletic prowess and my father, the real star in our family was my mother, who unfortunately passed a year ago, but she had her own business, her own consulting firm. And so, someone like Roger Staubach, he named me. My parents thought I'd be a girl, and obviously I'm not. And my dad was very methodical, very deliberate, and had not thought of, my mom and dad had not thought of boys' names. And so the Cowboy quarterback took control of the huddle, and here we are, Grant. If he hadn't, I'd still be Baby Boy Hill to this day. But that connection and that awareness to his story, and to think about it, back then, to supplement their income, they had jobs in the off season. My dad worked at a bank for 5 years, his first 5 years in the NFL. Roger Staubach worked for a real estate company, but then leveraged that and used that experience to start a company and had a great exit and did very well. And so when I talked to my peers in the 90s about Roger Staubach and his story, they obviously knew who he was, but they weren't aware of his story and his success. And I think the beauty of athletes today is just the access to information. To have these stories, to have the awareness. Now that, hey, I'm not just an athlete, but I can do other things. And I remember when I came out of college in 1994, and my handler said that, you have an opportunity to be a brand. And I couldn't quite conceptualize what that was, because I knew what a brand was, but the idea of an individual being a brand, it didn't quite make sense. Now, everyone is sort of their own sort of personal brand, and particularly athletes. There's so much awareness of their value, but the access, the exposure, athletes today are businessmen and businesswomen, and are very much aware of not just what they can do on the court or the field, but what they can really do in the investor world and business. And we've seen loads of examples of that, of the modern athlete, which, as an old head, makes you very proud.
One of the things that we talked a lot about backstage, and I've heard this theme coming out in our early conversation here, is the idea of your investment thesis. And that's unique to every athlete, right? We were just talking about this. Not everybody's going to be Magic or Shaq or Michael. Grant, and some of the things that you've done is unique to you and what your values are as an investor and as a human. And you sort of see what's out there, but ultimately you've got to identify what it is to you that makes you tick, both financially and purpose-wise. And I think that's something that's been really meaningful in our conversations, because everybody's story is different. It goes back to your individual investment thesis. And Evan, just to come to you a little bit, as you're working with athletes in your role, how do you see that uniqueness come out from an investment perspective as it relates to the different athletes that you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for clarifying, Paul, that the athlete that you look up to most on this panel is Grant, not myself. But I'd say the way we think about athletes at Meta is we want to help them win off the field of play, full stop. And I think when athletes win, the ecosystem wins. And I think the way that we start to think about that, and the most common ways that athletes come to us with what's important to them or what winning looks like, is kind of, Grant, what you mentioned, building a personal brand and growing it, unlocking and maximizing business opportunities, supporting the causes and charities that they care most about, and just as a person, like connecting with their fans and friends and family as well. And so what our team does is essentially we go across the Meta universe of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Reality Labs, and really help build a bespoke plan of, if this is what winning looks like to you off the field, here's how you can leverage technology and social media in particular to achieve those goals. And I think to the point is, like, everyone's goals are vastly different. It could be in physical investing, it could be in tech investing, it could be in just like all philanthropic endeavors. And I think the beauty about social media and the community around Instagram is there's a community for every kind of value output that an athlete wants, and we want to help kind of connect those things through those strategies as well.
Yeah, I've known Evan for a while. I've never seen him play sports. But if it had not been for Facebook in 2008 when I graduated, I would have more directly perhaps followed the Roger Staubach trajectory and stayed in commercial real estate. There's actually someone here who I interned for back at the Cordish Company. Facebook then enabled me to essentially figure out if there was a product market fit for professional lacrosse. And there was, because they had just at the time enabled fan pages. And the reason why that's important is that with Facebook, there's a, I don't know if the cap's changed, but there was a 5,000, you could only have up to 5,000 friends. It's a lot, but someone determined it would be 5,000 back in 2004. And so if you were Grant Hill, you were gonna have loads of pending friend requests from kids who wanted to be Grant's friend. So he said, let's do fan pages. And all of a sudden, Grant could have 10 million fans. So that showed me that, wow, almost in 4 weeks, I had the same amount of people who were following my Facebook page as I played in front of at the college Final Four, which was 50,000. So there's something here. So athletes learn so much about how to not only build an audience, but build a relationship to an audience, which is a huge value add to a brand or a property that is trying to attract athletes to invest. And I just think that can't be overstated, that is a core driver, especially for younger athletes now, and a value proposition for brands.
Tamika, at the Union, it's not just about individual investments. There's the collective investments, Think 450, putting the collective name, image, and likeness of the players to work monetarily. What's that been like since you've been at the helm? And where do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, so for sure, I think everyone has always looked at the PA as simply the union. We protect, support, and amplify our players. But the reality is, in our last CBA negotiation, we actually won our group licensing rights back. So hence we have Think 450, which has the ability to actually sell our group licensing. So not only is it an opportunity to sell the name, image, and likeness of our 450 players, but it's also an opportunity to tell our story a little differently. So one of the things that we were just able to do, I don't know how many people in here actually play 2K, but if you did, you would see that the Union is now in 2K. And in that, we are telling the story about what's your and. So we're asking our players, what's your and? And the reason we're doing that is because we want our players to be seen for more than just players. So even in the corporate world, we talked about performance being the thing that everyone focused on, right? Like how much intellectual capital you brought to the table. But for our players, we know that they are the best athletes in the world, right? And so they focus on that. Whereas we know the people who are most successful also are looking at image, brand, right? And they're also looking at exposure. So I always talk about this pie. So for us, the and has to be what they're bringing forth from a brand and an exposure perspective. So having Think 450 gives us the opportunity to do that. And I know, Todd, you talked a lot about, and Paul, you mentioned too, about like, what do our players invest in? It's not only what they're bringing to the table from a VC perspective, it's also that many of them are on boards. So we have Andre, who is an active player serving on a public company board. They're bringing not only what they can do on the court, but they're also bringing their intellectual capacity and their experiences to the floor too, which I think is huge.
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the most interesting things that I learned, and Grant knows exactly where I'm going with this. I did my prep call with Grant the other day, and he happens to be on the board of Campbell's. And I happen to be a big fan of Rayo's arrabbiata sauce. Anybody else? Yeah, we got some awesome. So if you didn't follow the news this summer, Campbell's actually acquired Rayo's for, I think the number was $2.7 billion. And so once Grant mentioned to me that he was on the board of Campbell's, I immediately was like, tell me what your role was in that acquisition. So Grant, tell everybody what your role was in that acquisition.
I'm afraid.
I bet you didn't think you had Rayo's soup on your bingo cards today.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I can assure you and everyone in the audience that we will not be changing the ingredients. It'll be as.
Will you be changing the price because it's $9.99 a jar?
Well, we're a lot of headwinds right now in the consumer packaged goods space, but no, we're really excited. As a typical board, you provide oversight. Management reports to you. the idea, the investment thesis, ultimately all of their due diligence, and I guess the board signs off. So we approve, the opportunity to acquire, and so we're really excited about that. But to speak to Tamika's point, and about Andre, which I was not aware of. There's real value from the experience of being an athlete. You have so many people in the business world who look for, for former athletes, maybe student athletes who have that experience, have been a part of a team, understand culture. Those values transfer. Those values are important. And we talk so much, particularly in corporate America, about diversity. And we think of ethnicity, we think of gender, but really diversity of experience and perspective is so valuable. So even in the Campbell's board meeting, I'm sitting, the former CEO of Hershey's and the former, CFO of Pepsi, these people who have been in this space, and sometimes that can be, at least at first, it can be intimidating. But my perspective, my experience as a consumer, as someone who's not in that world, actually there's real value. And then as we talk about succession, we talk about culture, we talk about a number of things that make a team, but also an organization successful. Well, I have that same experience. I always say you can go in any locker room in any sport, and you can tell if it's a good culture or a bad culture. And a lot of times you can go in any executive team, you can do the same. You can sense that. So there's value. There's value from the experience of being an athlete, and especially if you've been an athlete at the highest level, like an Andre Iguodala has done.
There's a lot of talk today about, obviously, team ownership, a lot of team owners up here. I know in the recent collective bargaining agreement, there was some language in there about allowing active players to invest in teams in the NBA or the WNBA through funds. Paul, we were talking a little bit backstage about, your interest, and obviously Grant with the Hawks. Would love to get the collective thoughts about athletes as investors in teams, what works, what doesn't work, and where you see that going. And maybe we can start with you, Paul, in the middle.
Well, I'm happy to go second, actually. I'd love to hear how you got that deal done, and I'm sure the pushback was around conflict of interest, so
Yeah,
I'll jump in on our
absolutely. And so, yes, it is one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I'm grateful that we do have a true partnership in looking at what our players want to invest in. And so you are right that collectively our players are investing, obviously individually as well. So individually, our players can invest up to 4% now in W clubs, so in ownership, and then collectively up to 8%. And this is in teams in which there are not NBA owners in those teams as well, which I think is huge, particularly as we've seen the expansion even last week in San Francisco. I think that you'll see more teams expanding, and so won't it be great that our players are invested in that way? That's one thing. The other side is we as a PA, which means collectively we can invest on behalf of our players up to 5% in PE funds that are investing in teams. So you all saw earlier the ISOs up here, and we obviously, Arctos, I think Doc was on a panel earlier. So we have the ability now to invest in them. The great thing is we've come to an agreement. So now from a regulatory perspective, because of conflict, we are meeting with Department of Labor. We're talking through what does that mean? How does that look like? Because again, I'm supposed to protect our players. So making sure that those things are aligned, but it is such a fantastic opportunity. Even now we can invest in sports betting, which someone else talked about is really expanding. Before, we could not do that. And so even having that 1% interest in a sports betting company is huge for our players.
yeah. And as a result, Kevin Durant's an investor in the PLL.
Yes.
I think for us, when we were rebuilding professional lacrosse, we knew that it was going to be a long road, and we also knew the history of other sports leagues that were at their inception and how many stories have been told by former NFL players or former NBA players that see the delta of wages from the 60s to now. And only if they could have just participated in a small part of the upside for all of the work that they put into it. So when we launched, we actually gave all of our players stock options, and we continue that on. Today, it comes out of our ESOP pool. So we're a true single entity. It's a little bit cleaner than a trade association in that all 8 teams are wholly owned by the league, and so our players are participating actively in our growth. and we're super transparent with them. We believe in not only the participation as a shareholder, but also the upside of what we're looking to build and how more revenue increases wages and so on and so forth. They have healthcare that's year-round, and that's all new to a sport like lacrosse and a lot of nascent stage leagues. So athletes participating in an upside is advantageous for leagues, is advantageous for teams. We can sort out the conflict of interest should there be any, but my hunch is that that was a placating mechanism for something that was just different and new and innovative.
Grant, your involvement with the Hawks, if you can talk about that a little bit as it relates to player investment with teams.
Yes, no, I mean, I remember when, well, first of all, I was fortunate when I retired. 2 years after I retired, I was able to invest into the Atlanta Hawks. And, but, for me, the thought process or the idea of participating as a governor really started my rookie year. And I couldn't quite understand how Bill Davidson, the late owner of the Detroit Pistons, this was just one of his side investments, owning the Pistons. And I said, wow, I want to be in that position one day. And so really just not sure how it would happen, who it would be with. But yeah, I mean, I feel it's always been a dream of mine. And, look, I've been fortunate to do a lot of really unique things in the investment world, in real estate, multifamily, commercial, obviously on boards. But, I had a fund that we invested in small businesses. I've personally invested in people, and but there's no investment that's as fun as investing in sports. And it's also frustrating and nerve-wracking and incredibly challenging. But yeah, I mean, look, you start as a fan and you fall in love with a sport or sports in general. And to be able to play it and then now participate on this side and have this awesome responsibility as a steward, it's something that's absolutely incredible. And to see more and more former athletes, Dwayne Wade just got involved with the Utah Jazz. It just lets you know that it can happen. And you bring some real value. I mean, just that perspective that we talked about again. It was funny at one point, when we bought the Hawks, a number of our partners were in private equity. And, I was flirting with the idea of jumping into private equity myself. And they all said, why the hell do you want to do that? We want to do what you're doing. Like, we want to be in sport. And so, anyway, it's just, I'm always mindful. I'm a history major. I always think of how, in the ancient civilizations, the ancient Greeks, and certainly want to be respectful of what's happening now in the world. But in the years of wars, they would, halt wars. The years of Olympics, they would halt wars to put on the Olympic Games. And they just understood then the value and the importance and the significance of sport and how it can inspire and entertain and do so much for society. And, man, that is so much more magnified, obviously, now. And so to have a leadership role and to bring sort of the wealth of experiences, I mean, it's something I'm incredibly grateful for. And we need to get more, at least in our business, in the NBA. I think we need more former athletes at the table offering their perspective. And I hope that will happen.
I love the idea up here, but there are a lot of really good ideas, a lot of good investment thesis. But then when it comes to execution, I think that's often where the ball gets dropped. Paul, when I was researching you for this, it's like one day you were just, playing in a league and you're like, this doesn't work right, I'm going to build my own. Like, I'm sure we all think like that, but to actually go out there and execute it to the degree that you have is incredibly impressive. And, I'll come back to you, Evan, for a question. When you're working with your athletes and I'm sure you get a lot of ideas floated at you, like what makes successful execution for an athlete that comes to you with an idea how to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak on the broader trend, which I think is that there's an incredible amount of white space that technology has afforded athletes in a way that historically a lot of the infrastructure necessary kind of built the sport to where it is today. Technology is, in a lot of ways, has allowed athletes to connect directly with fans, build audiences. In a lot of ways, Facebook and Instagram are the world's largest sports stadium of sports fans to directly connect with athletes. So with that, Historically, if you look at like ways that fans might have gotten to know Grant in different ways, is maybe through brands, through media, through different other avenues. Now the kind of macro trend of storytelling through the lens of your own voice, which LeBron has obviously pioneered in a modern way. And modern media is one thing that I think is like afforded a way of like how athletes think about it. So when they bring ideas to us, I think it's a really interesting question on execution, because I think we're still at the like nascency phase of athletes as entrepreneurs, athletes as investors, and like I think there's so much more to go, both in kind of the major sports, but also as you get down into kind of niche emerging sports as well. And I think there's probably everyone in this room has a multi-million-dollar idea, and then the question is, how do they execute on it? And I think the interesting thing that like kind of alludes to the points that you guys were just making around what athletes bring to the table, and like the capital or the portfolio of capital that athletes bring. One is their athletic ability, their name, image, and likeness, but it's also their mindset. And I think an athlete's mindset to win at all costs is exactly what you need to execute, or at least get the right foot forward in kind of the right idea. And oftentimes we play the role of just introducing people to say, if you're interested in this type of venture, these are the type of people you should talk to. Paul, Grant, you guys are both interested in this. Let's figure out how we have this discussion on Instagram Live to talk about your two passions and see what comes from that. So it's really just how you can kind of connect the industry and like look at connecting directly with your audience as well.
We've talked a lot about the current trends in athlete investment space. I think one of the things that we've all been very passionate about and talked a lot about in our prep calls is, in addition to the execution, it's protection, making sure that what the athletes are getting involved in, they are protected as they get into that space, and they are doing things in a way that is in their best interest. And Tamika, I know the union does a lot in terms of educating, opening doors for the membership. Collectively, I mean, what is your responsibility for making sure that your membership is making the right decisions off the court, away from the game? I mean, you can't be all places all the time, but
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
But you are right. I mean, that is one of our goals, is to make sure that we're at least setting them in the right direction. So when it comes to financial literacy, we're making sure that we're teaching them those things. We had an MBA in a day program this summer where we offered it a couple times this summer so they could learn some of the business acumen. So that is our responsibility, and it is something that I think that we're good at and can sort of filter them in the right direction. Even, I think, Paul, you mentioned sort of, making sure that they're spending their money the right way. That comes through education and getting exposure. So we have forensic accountants that we refer them to say, look at their books and records, make sure that the investments that they're making make sense for them, make sure that they have the right tax advisor. All of those things are things that we're making sure our players are also receiving, and it's critical to their overall success.
Grant, you might want to cover your ears for this, but if players who are drafted, I believe next year, if they in the NBA, they go through the series of max contracts over a 15-year career, I think the total earnings that they could achieve is something like $1 billion in W-2 as a 15-year NBA career gets drafted next year. Which, right? I don't know.
No, that's great for us too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody knows. It just shows that there's the popularity, the growth, the success, and certainly the players are the reason for that. Their success, and it's just interesting to me. I always say that the NBA in particular, it's a global marketing and public relations firm disguised as a league, and the thing that changes are the players, and there's new players that'll be coming in and will continue to lift the league and carry it. I've been with Tamika all over the world, and we were in Abu Dhabi a year ago. We were in Manila a few months ago, and the popularity and just the star power because of that. Because of the success overall, but also just the ability to market that brand and that logo is pretty incredible. And what's really incredible, I read this book this summer. I don't know if you've read The Cap, and it's about the 1983 negotiation between Larry Fleischer and David Stern, and sort of the relationship between the NBA and the Players Association leading up to that moment. And what was really fascinating when they went through that collective bargaining agreement was that the league was like struggling. And there were teams that, were barely holding on.
Yeah,
and
the cap was like $3.5 million per team, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly.
It was so low.
Those guys are you talk about jealous of players moving forward. But I mean, just so, leagues go through growing pains, and it goes through, you have to figure things out. But to think I came in the league 11 years later and the success, I mean, I couldn't imagine, where we were, and I was so grateful. But now it's just it's gone through the roof, and I just think how sports resonates and how we now consume sports. And I mean, it's just it's a good business to be in as an investor and as an athlete.
I thought you were going to plug your recent book.
Oh yeah, I have a book. Yeah, I wrote a book. It's called Game. Yep, it's a good story, I think. It's a good plug.
Yeah, one of the earlier panels today, they asked about sort of forward-looking where they sort of wanted to deploy capital, and it wasn't teams or leagues, it was the intersection of sports and technology, which I thought was interesting. We've got a couple of minutes left. I'd love to get from the audience, from the panel, are there areas that you're thinking about investing on a go-forward basis that perhaps we're not paying attention to, or things that you're seeing your membership interested in? The CBA introduced the ability to invest in cannabis and gaming, but are there sectors that are particularly of interest for you all as you look forward?
Well, I would say leagues and teams are examples of sports intersecting with technology. I am just so focused on continuing to build the enterprise value of the PLL. Prior to that, I had mentioned our investment advisory group that we just write personal checks out of. We don't manage LPs. We primarily started at early stage startups so that we could yield a somewhat decent return, and we thought we had a good investment thesis, which for us was domain expertise, sports technology, media, my brother from real estate, so that was a part of it. Being able to really vet the founders, because what we keep coming back to is, and using examples, actually the operators, the athletes who then built their own businesses or joined ownership. So it's important, and I know Tamika tells this to her athletes, is investing is high risk. It is really high risk, especially venture. So those two are really important to get right. And then can we be helpful ultimately in those categories through access to capital or network? I think that there's a lot of opportunity for those venture investments that cross over into sport. I remain incredibly bullish around where professional sports and even amateur sports have the ability to go in a fragmented media environment where it is now clearly the last standing firewall for advertisers and appointment watching television as a result, where we can get our entertainment, so our films and our favorite shows, as well as our news, ad-free for the price of, or tax essentially, of $9.99 a month. And a lot of people are opting to do that, and the trends are going to do that. But sports, they have natural advertising breaks, quarter breaks, timeouts, coaches' reviews, and all that. And so if you look at a $60 billion advertising market in the US alone, sports are continuing to grab that market share while ratings on a cord-cutting category is going up. So I'm biased, but very bullish on leagues and team values.
I would say I would agree with everything that Paul has mentioned. I will also say you're right, high risk, but also high reward. So the sooner that we can get our players to start to invest, so if you take a KD with 35 ventures and investing in Robinhood at $1 million, 1.2 billion, goes public for $32 billion, it's pretty good, right? But again, high risk. But understanding that and taking on that risk earlier on when it doesn't mean quite as much is huge for our players, and they have to be able to be comfortable doing that, asking the right questions, and certainly if it's things that they're more passionate about, it'll make a huge difference.
Yeah, and let me just also add, and sorry for
No, you're good, go ahead.
But what's also fantastic about athletes, especially NBA, if you look at NBA, it's basically global footballers and NBA players have the most relevance and the most reach and the largest audience by far. Like NFL is a distant third. And we could share that data. But because of that relevance, their deal flow is that of Andreessen Horowitz. Like most of us can't get into Robinhood, but athletes, because of their network effect, because of their liquidity, but because of what they can bring to these businesses, have an unfair advantage.
I'll just, from my seat as the banker to a lot of athletes, I will tell you the general trend is very positive. I'm very excited about this space. Athletes as investors, it's on the way up, and I love to see the stories every day. I think every athlete has their own individual story, and it's exciting to be a part of it from where I sit, but then also to see all of the work that you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis to continue to change the narrative. So this has been a lot of fun. We could probably talk for another hour. I'm grateful for everyone's attention today, and thank you for the panelists for participating. So thank you, guys.